Abd El Fattah. Quite the afternoon. Join me after the news.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, President Trump has accused the UN of funding an assault on Western countries by facilitating illegal immigration. In a wide-ranging address in New York, he also took aim at the Mayor of London, claiming the capital wants to go to Sharia law. Stephen Erlanger is from the New York Times and told LBC Mr Trump's feud with Sir Sadiq Khan is long-standing.
Why he thinks Sharia is coming to London or Sadiq Khan backs Sharia, I have no idea. But Trump throws these things around. He throws out figures that are not credible. It really was a kind of greatest hits of Donald Trump.
A spokesman for Sir Sadiq Khan has called the comments by Mr Trump bigoted. The leader of the Liberal Democrats has warned against what he called letting Trump's America become Farage's Britain. Howard Davies told his party conference in Bournemouth the UK faces a stark choice at the next general election and challenged delegates to beat the Conservatives. An asylum seeker found guilty of sexually assaulting a 14-year-old girl and a woman in Essex has been jailed for 12 months. Hadush Kabatu's arrest led to protests at a hotel housing migrants in Epping. And unions are demanding ministers set up a furlough scheme for Jaguar Land Rover workers after it extended its shutdown until at least next week. It suspended production after suffering a cyber attack at the end of last month. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed down 3 earlier at 92.23. The pound buys $1.35 and a euro 14. LBC weather dry and clear for most tonight. Some showers in the southeast, lows of 7 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Dominic Ellis.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. Well, this was absolutely classic Donald Trump. The president's address to the United Nations this afternoon was long, boastful, at times funny, and included an acerbic takedown of the UN itself. But above all, this was the most comprehensive frontal attack Trump has made on Western Europe so far. He talked of countries being destroyed by mass immigration. You are going to hell, he said.
When your prisons are filled with so-called asylum seekers who repaid kindness, and that's what they did, they repaid kindness with crime. It's time to end the failed experiment of open borders. You have to end it now. See, I can tell you, I'm really good at this stuff. Your countries are going to hell.
Europe was also using suicidal, useless renewable energies while treacherously refusing to stop buying Russian oil, even as the war in Ukraine grinds on. And London said Trump was going to Sharia law. Now, this is a proper challenge. There's no point in sniggering about it or pretending we haven't heard him. But Western Europe faces an even more direct threat as well. Also at the United Nations, the Polish Foreign Secretary Radek Sikorski, referring to recent Russian aircraft incursions over Estonia and the drones sent over his own country, addressed these words to Moscow.
We are peaceful democracies who have studiously avoided actively joining your attempt to reconquer Ukraine. But we will not be intimidated. I have only one request to the Russian government. If another missile or aircraft enters our space without permission, deliberately or by mistake, and gets shot down and the wreckage falls on NATO territory, please don't come here to whine about it. You have been warned.
Meanwhile, in Denmark, where drones have shut down Copenhagen airport, the Prime Minister said she could not rule out Russian involvement. Something similar seems to have happened in Oslo, in Norway, as well. We can't know the full truth at this point, but it does look very much as if Putin is jabbing Western Europe hard in the chest as a provocation and a warning that the Ukraine war could spread. Let's talk first tonight to Lord George Robertson, the former Secretary-General of NATO. I wanted his reaction to those chilling words from Sikorski and his insight into what the NATO rules of engagement actually are when Russian aircraft breach NATO territory.
It'll depend on the circumstances, depend very much on what the local commanders on the ground feel at that time. But I think the clear thing is that there needs to be a very bright red line round the Article 5 countries, the countries that are in NATO. And they need to give a very clear, stark warning that NATO is a defensive alliance, but that the borders of the NATO countries are inviolate.
Sacrosanct. So that means if Putin sends a jet over Poland, Sikorsky has been absolutely clear, we will shoot it down.
That would be the right of Poland to do, but we've got to watch that these provocations, because that's what they are, by the Russians, don't lead us into a full-scale conflict. If they are simply testing, they need to be told very bluntly and clearly about what the consequences will be in the future if they do it.
What's your sense of what's coming from Moscow? Because clearly, in a sense, Putin is jabbing us all in the chest, trying to find out where the reaction comes, how strong the reaction will be. It's a dangerous, dangerous game. It's
a very, very dangerous game, and he knows what he's doing because they don't have any sort of revision. They don't have anybody round about them challenging them at all. So he's making decisions on his own. So he's doing a probing exercise, and he needs to be told very clearly, very bluntly, and without any equivocation at all, that if he keeps doing that, there will be huge consequences for him and for his military.
Now, Norway is one of the NATO countries the Russians are most irritated at the moment. Denmark, another one, because the Danes have done all sorts of deals with Ukraine, Russia particularly hates. Both the Danish capital airport in Copenhagen and the Norwegian one in Oslo have had drones flown at them and been disrupted quite severely over the last couple of days. Do you think it's a coincidence?
Probably not a coincidence, but then it's difficult to attribute, especially when so many people have got private drones themselves. But I think only one problem is being identified here, and that is the overflight of drones and of fast jets. There is another war going on against us, and that is in the grey zone, cyber attacks, sabotage taking place across the continent of Europe, undersea cables being tracked and being threatened, all of these things, targeted assassinations and disinformation campaigns, all of that is ongoing.
And of course the problem is none of us know quite what's coming from where. So we've got Jaguar Land Rover, no more production there for yet another week after the cyber attack. We don't know if that was Russia, but it could well have been.
Indeed, a lot of these things are not easily attributable. But again, we need to give a very clear warning to our adversaries, whoever they are. And it's not just Russia. Other people are out there to subvert us as well. We're not safe at the moment. I've been making it clear after the Defence Review came out. We are underprepared, we're underinsured, and we're under attack. That means we're not particularly safe, and we need to do something about it.
And this is a moment where one mistake, one error by either side could take us to the brink very quickly.
It's possible, but I think if it's clear enough to the Russians and to others what the consequences will be of attacking any of the countries that are covered by Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, then I think they'll back off. Robustness and deterrence is what we basically need at the moment.
I can't let you go without asking you about what you think of Donald Trump's statement today in the United Nations that the most extraordinary full-frontal attack on Western European democracies, countries, he says, that are destroying themselves, committing some kind of national suicide by the level of mass immigration into them. London is going for Sharia law, he says. How should we respond?
I think we do it quietly because he can change his mind next week. I was in Washington last week and I watched a lot of the television coverage that took place, especially over the state visit over here. I was in Washington when the president was in London and at Windsor as well. I think that the president is given to these flights of rhetoric. But underneath it all is a system that is very much tied to ours. The speeches that he made last week were very clearly identifying the fact that the United States and the United Kingdom are close together. So underneath a lot of the noise, there's a working relationship that is really quite important and going on into the future.
Yes, a big swing of mood compared with last week, this week. He also had a real go at the United Nations. Should the UN be worried?
I think the UN should be definitely worried because they are not getting the money that they need, neither from the United States nor from China. China's deeply in arrears with the UN as well. And yet the United Nations, for all its imperfections, and there aren't many, is the great hope for the world where we all sit round debating and discussing conflicts and worries. It should be supported, not attacked.
One other point President Trump made was that he was prepared to impose really serious sanctions both on Russia and the countries buying Russian oil to fuel their military ambitions. But the fact that Western European countries are still buying Russian oil, he said, was outrageous, and that had to stop. Would you agree with him there?
I think he's got a point. I think there are countries inside NATO, inside the European Union, who are still dependent upon Russian oil, and I think the quicker they get away from that, the better. And I think the rest of the...
Can we name them?
Well, the Hungary and Slovakia are two of the countries that are involved in doing that, and they are the ones who are the ones most sceptical about Russian sanctions. And I think they've got to be singled out and identified, and they've got to be told that this is not acceptable.
Lord Robertson, thank you very much indeed for coming in. And listening to that was Robert Wilkie, who was Secretary of Veterans Affairs in the first Trump administration and who remains an ally of the president. Mr. Wilkie, thank you very much for joining me. Can you explain to people listening, Donald Trump has always been America first. He's very clear he's an American president for Americans. How do we read this, as it were, land grab into European politics? It's as if he wants to change the political landscape right across Western Europe. Why?
Well, Andrew, he certainly wants to change the political landscape. And the tactic that I see, and look, I'm a Europhile, as you know, an Anglophile. I've got Churchill behind me, Wellington, and Disraeli over there. Look, we are inseparable from Europe, particularly from Great Britain. But he does want to send shockwaves through the continent, first on the military side. And I'll use a NATO member as an example, Canada. When you and I were born, Canada had the fourth largest army in NATO. Today, the Canadian Army is the size of the Alabama National Guard, which is our 30th largest state. There are less than 50 pilots in the Canadian Air Force. The same plays out throughout Europe, and it's been up to the United States to fill those gaps. And now that we have a rampant China, Europe has to carry its load, and Trump is certainly clear about that. Look, he made a speech in 2017 in Warsaw where he laid out the assaults on Western civilization. And he was targeting Merkel and Germany because of the uncontrolled immigration, legal immigration, that changed the very fabric of the republic. And, I certainly see it in Great Britain in terms of what George Robertson used to represent as the traditional Labour Party, and now what is represented by those who are demanding Keir Starmer isolate and punish Israel without doing much to Hamas. So he's seen those changes as I have, and that's very troubling to many of us in the United States.
So are we moving, in a sense, from MAGA, make America great again, to MEGA? His desire to change Europe, make Europe great again.
I really do. And look, what you saw last week was genuine. And I sat in enough cabinet meetings for 3.5 years to know that the President of the United States' affection for the United Kingdom is actually beyond the affection he has for any other country on the planet. It's genuine. And I can say this as a military man, as someone whose father served with British soldiers. I did. Look, we don't do well on the world stage unless Great Britain is with us, unless Great Britain is strong. And you bring a historical perspective, a cultural acuity that we don't have, and a certain valiance among most countries in the world in terms of your diplomatic power and traditions that are absolutely vital if the West is going to survive.
Let me put this, therefore, gently and diplomatically, because some of the words that Trump uses and some of the phrases he uses can cause huge offence here. I mean, it is simply not true that London is going to Sharia law. There are plenty of Muslims in London and they have their own mosques and so forth, but London is no more going to Sharia law than is New York or Washington or Chicago, and it lands very badly here.
Yeah. Well, I think let me take my perspective on that. First of all, Trump's tactics are to say outrageous things, and then he controls the debate. It's an old tactic. Once you're staggered, then he's controlling where you're going. But what he is concerned about, and I think these are been made manifest by Starmer's pronouncements in the last week, is the rise of a group, particularly within labor, that denies that continuum of Western civilization that began in the Judean desert 3,000 years ago, that paints Israel as the greatest enemy of the world, and is leading Starmer and has led Macron to flights of fancy that are not only anti-Israeli, but they're detrimental to the actual fabric of both France and Britain. And that's what he sees. Now, he can rattle off the fact that there are 85 Sharia councils in Britain, but the notion that 6 to 7% of the population are now guiding the government of the United Kingdom in its strategic political decisions is very frightening to people like me.
We are on the very lip and edge of a much wider and longer conversation here, for which, sadly, tonight we don't have time. But Robert Wilkie, thank you very much indeed for that. Up next, grim news for the British economy from the OECD this morning. I'm going to speak to a former leading banker and ask if the government needs to see this as an opportunity to overhaul their economic plans entirely. That's next. You are listening to Tonight with Andrew Marr, and the time now 6:17.
Weekdays from 7 a.m.
Why this staggering level of incompetence?
Straight to the point.
This is the economics of the madhouse from this government.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
But she does seem to struggle with her sums.
Listen on Global Player or the new LBC app. Download it now from your app store. LBC. Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:19. Here's a simple thought. This isn't working. Because I'm proud of this country and I like it, and I like the people who form this government, well, some of them anyway, I desperately hope that last summer's general election would be followed by the British economy taking a new direction. But I was wrong. Let's talk to Howard Davies, Sir Howard Davies. And let me start, Howard. Is this a moment, this OECD report, when we actually say we're going in the wrong direction?
Well, I think there is a need to think about the direction, particularly on the fiscal front. I'm not actually sure that this OECD report changes the world a great deal. I mean, it does say that our inflation rate is more sticky, but we knew that. It says that our growth rate is likely to fall next year, but actually it says the same thing about the European Union and indeed about the US. And we remain sort of in the middle of the pack. And the difficulty, I think, is that it's fine to have a kind of growth rhetoric, and we all know, the general direction is something that a lot of people actually support. But if you're in a bad neighborhood, and the world is not a great neighborhood at the moment, Europe is slow growing, German economy has not grown at all, it's very hard to buck that trend on your own. And what the OECD is saying is not going to happen.
So, in a sense, don't blame the politicians necessarily in charge at the moment. Blame the neighbourhood and perhaps blame the last 20 years or so. And I wonder where you think the moment where we might have taken an important moment.
It's factually true that our growth rate before the financial crisis was significantly stronger than since it. Our productivity growth was faster up to the financial crisis than it has been since. We've had basically almost no productivity growth. There are those who say that we were on a kind of sugar rush before the financial crisis, and that what was driving our economy was a rapid growth in the financial sector, which was almost certain to end in tears. Economists, there are a lot of ones with perfect hindsight, and that's what people now say. We shouldn't have been fooled into thinking that we were on a sustainable 2+% real growth rate before the financial crisis, because it was all fueled by a massive increase in debt and by a supersized financial sector. That came to an end, and the trend changed in 2008-9.
Yeah. Right now, however, we clearly have a productivity problem, clearly have an employment growth problem. If you are sitting having a candid, quiet conversation with Rachel Reeves at the moment, thinking about her speech at the Labour Party conference and then the budget, and thinking about the effect, for instance, of the national insurance changes on employers, what would you be telling her?
Well, I think I'd probably need to be talking to Morgan McSweeney rather than to Rachel Reeves, because I think he is the source of the problem, if you like. Well, the way I see it is Jeremy Hunt implemented 2 completely unsustainable changes to national insurance in a desperate attempt to win the last election. He kicked a hole in the government's finances. And unfortunately, the Labour Party, in pursuit of its own ambitions for a large majority, committed not to mend the hole in that bucket. I think I'm mixing my metaphors here somewhat, but
we get you. We understand.
Trying to get to.
Yeah.
And since then, they've been trying desperately to find any money they can find behind any sofa to try to make the books add up. And it looks as though, and I think the actual bigger news today really is the Resolution Foundation looking forward at the books and the stories coming out about where the OBR have got to, suggesting that we may have a fiscal gap of about £30 billion to fill in the next budget. The simple way of filling that would be to say, look, guys, it was mucked up by Jeremy Hunt. We didn't realise how bad it was, and now we are going to correct it by a simple measure of a small increase in income tax or a small increase in national insurance, which would then stop you tinkering with all these other things that are worrying people. But unfortunately, I'm not sure she's going to do that. I think she missed the opportunity to do that last summer.
Well, we will see. So, Howard, only because I'm a mind reader, we're going straight to the Resolution Foundation after this interview. But in your view, there's going to have to be some tax rises, presumably, in the budget. And the choice is lots of little ones here, there, and everywhere, hoping they don't have too big an effect on this part of the economy or that, or else go for broke and have one big general one, which might have broken some of the manifesto promises. That's the choice.
That's, I think, the choice. The Resolution Foundation have come out with what I think economists would categorize as a wizard wheeze. And this wizard wheeze is to increase income tax, but to reduce national insurance, and therefore to be able to say you haven't increased the impost on working people. And the trick is that you then get more money from the non-working people, the pensioners, and from dividend income and all of that, because that has income tax applied and it doesn't have national insurance applied, and therefore you get a little bit more income, but not a huge amount actually, from making that change, which you could, with a fair wind, present as being not inconsistent with the promises made before the last election.
It is a stretch.
but I think it's the best they could do.
It's a stretch. It's a very, very clever dodge, which we will now investigate at slightly more detail. So Howard Davies, former chairman of NatWest and chair of the Royal Bank of Scotland, thank you very much indeed for that. Because we're going to hear now from the chief executive of the Resolution Foundation, Ruth Curtice. They came out with the advice to the Chancellor to save money today by exactly what Sir Howard was describing, and she explained in the detail to me a little bit more earlier this afternoon.
So at the moment, we have a tax system which disincentivises or discourages or punishes employment. So employment is taxed higher than other forms of income, and that's because it's the only income on which we pay personal national insurance. So our proposal is to put up income tax by 2p, but to cut employee national insurance by 2p at the same time. That protects workers' pay packets. It means an employee with a job would not pay any extra tax, but it would require extra tax from people who currently don't pay any personal national insurance.
So explain to people just who we're talking about. Landlords, people living off shares?
Particular groups affected are landlords, self-employed and pensioners. So for landlords, this would require 2% extra income tax on their rental income. We simply don't see any reason why landlords should pay lower tax rates than their tenants. For the self-employed, it would require, again, it would mean a 2% increase, but current rates on self-employment income are lower than they have been historically. So this would still leave the rate lower than it has been in decades, apart from the last 2 years. The biggest group affected is pensioners. They would see an increase. For example, a pensioner on £25,000 would see an increase of £250 in their tax bill. At the same time, we know that the basic state pension is going to go up quite significantly next year by over £500. So it's only pensioners with incomes over £40,000 who would be losing out.
Sticking with pensioners, we both know that pensioners vote and have therefore got a big political influence in this country. There is the triple lock, which protects pensions and allows them to go up and up and up. Would this not break the spirit, if not the letter, of the triple lock promise?
Well, the triple lock is about what will happen to the basic state pension. And as you say, it has this ratchet effect between 2.5% inflation and earnings. That means that pensioners have done relatively well over the last 20 years. They've seen material rises in their living standards while others have not. I think the tax system can be treated quite separately from the state pension, not least because those on the poorest incomes are protected in the sense that their state pension rises and they wouldn't pay income tax. So income tax is very different from the state pension. It's higher on those with higher earnings.
Now, your headline policy, as it were, does include the words raise income tax by 2p. We all remember the promises made by Rachel Reeves during the general election campaign. Does this not break that promise?
So look, I think our role is to think about what would be right for living standards in this country in an extremely difficult autumn where we expect there to be such a large fiscal gap that it might be that there is a real tension between the detailed wording of a manifesto and what is right for the economy. So that's really what we've been focused on. Equally, we've made proposals in the spirit of protecting working people.
Though those promises always did include the phrase working people. So I suppose you could argue that although you are raising income tax when you said you weren't going to raise income, I say you, the government, when they said they weren't going to raise income tax because it wouldn't affect working people at all, the spirit of the promise isn't really broken.
It wouldn't affect workers' pay packets. I wouldn't go so far as to claim, for example, that the self-employed are not working people. So I think we need to be somewhat careful with the language. But I think this is a proposal that protects pay packets, improves the tax system while still raising revenue.
Now, the person who had your job before, of course, Torsten Bell, is now the man inside the Treasury writing this budget, which is why we're so particularly interested in what the Resolution Foundation is saying. But he is also part of a Treasury which looks at the OECD numbers today and thinks perhaps the entire strategy this country is going through economically just isn't working. What's your view?
So look, we have a particular problem around inflation at the moment, and we have thought very carefully about that in making our suggestions today. And I think that will be top of the Treasury's mind as they go through the autumn. And so in particular, that does constrain the tax choices that they can make and making tax choices that do not affect inflation right now does seem important.
Thinking of growth, thinking of businesses, thinking of employment, do you think putting that extra money on employers' national insurance contributions was, in retrospect, a mistake?
So So I think there have clearly been quite negative effects from the employer national insurance rise. In particular, the way it was done in lowering the threshold seems to us to have had a big impact at the bottom end of the labour market. We've seen months of falling employment numbers, which is very unusual outside of a recession. So there have been big effects. I don't think there are obvious ways that they could have raised the same sum of money without breaching those manifesto promises. So it slightly comes back to that debate.
All right, I suggest that you have a quick call with Torsten, have him round for a drink or a coffee and a word in his ear. Ruth Curtice, thank you very much indeed. And on the taxes, we're just going to have to wait and see, I guess. Now, the Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Ed Davey, levelled an astonishing claim against Nigel Farage in his speech this afternoon. But did Sir Ed go too far? We'll talk about that. First, the time now, 6:31, and Dominic Ellis has your news headlines.
A former Secretary-General of Nato has told LBC that European leaders should react quietly after Donald Trump's scathing attack on their border policies. Lord Robertson has also told Tonight with Andrew Marr that the UN should be concerned after the US President criticised the organisation in a major speech earlier. The leader of the Liberal Democrats has accused Nigel Farage of wanting to turn Britain into Donald Trump's America. In a speech at his party's conference, Ed Davey claimed a reform government would privatise the NHS and also roll back gun laws. And it's understood the Home Office wants to deport an asylum seeker following his prison sentence for sexually assaulting a woman and a teenage girl in Essex. Hadush Kabatu, who was being housed at the Bell Hotel in Epping when he was arrested in July, sparked nationwide protests. LBC weather dry and clear for most tonight. Some showers in the southeast, lows of 7 degrees.
On the latest episode of The Newsagents.
Why is the Health Secretary Wes Streeting having to take to TV today to urge people to ignore medical advice being issued by Donald Trump? We're discussing that on The Newsagents, as well as whether Reform's deportation plan is falling apart at the seams. Listen now on our free Global Player app.
Get the latest episode of The Newsagents with Emily Maitlis, John Sopel and Lewis Goodall. Listen or watch on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app. Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:34. Now, last night I thought I made it pretty clear that Reform with its deportation plan was going too far. Tonight, in just the same spirit, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey, went too far. In his speech to the party conference, he asked people to imagine a Nigel Farage-led Britain where gun laws are rolled back so schools have to teach our children what to do in the case of a mass shooting. Let's hear now from Daisy Cooper, the Liberal Democrat deputy leader. I put it to her that the comments made by Davey were alarmist and simply not true.
Well, what Ed Davey actually said was that he doesn't want Trump's America to become Farage's Britain. And his speech was about what kind of country we want to be. I think when Nigel Farage has said things in the past, or there's things that he's said or done, I think it's important that we hold him to account and find out whether he still holds those views, whether he still wants to destroy our environment through fracking, whether he still wants to sell off our NHS. I think these are important questions to ask.
Let me, since you say I was misquoting him, let me tell you exactly what Ed Davies said. He said, imagine a Britain under Nigel Farage, and I'm now quoting, where gun laws are rolled back so schools have to teach our children what to do in the case of a mass shooting, full stop. There is absolutely no evidence that Farage or Reform want to change our gun laws. None at all.
Well, at some point in the past, Nigel Farage did say that he wanted to relax gun laws, but there's a broader point here, which is that time and time again, Reform UK are outlining policies and ideas and taking them from Donald Trump. And I think we are just very clear that in terms of the kind of country that we want to live in, we don't want Trump's America to become Farage's Britain. We want to speak up for the silent liberal majority who wants decency in this country. And for anybody who is proud and patriotic for Britain, then we are their party.
But we also want a Britain in which politicians stick to the truth, don't exaggerate, don't indulge in hyperbole, and don't go for each other in a way you might say happens in America. And that, I'm afraid, is what your party has been guilty of this afternoon.
Well, if we're getting into media tactics, then of course using hyperbole and divisive language is precisely what Nigel Farage does all the time. What we're saying...
So you shouldn't, really.
What kind of country do you want to live in? And we want to live in a country where our NHS works, where social care is fixed, where we can clean up our environment. And I think it's right that we challenge Nigel Farage on whether he wants to sell out our NHS and have fracking in the countryside.
Now, you connect Nigel Farage to Trump perfectly reasonably, and just at the same time as Ed Davey was speaking, Donald Trump was speaking in the United Nations, and it was the broadest kind of ideological attack on Western Europe I could remember from an American leader. And I'd just like to ask about aspects of it. He says that Western countries are being destroyed by mass immigration. There are an awful lot of people in the UK who agree with him. Do you?
Look, there's absolutely no doubt that our immigration system and our asylum system are broken and that it's the Conservatives who broke it. But is it destroying the West? Is it destroying Europe and Britain? It isn't destroying us. No, we have a very proud history in this country of taking people in who are fleeing war and persecution. But at the same time, we recognise that people want a firm and fair system to work. And it's important that we do get a firm and fair system. But if we don't want hyperbole, that is hyperbole. And I do reject it.
A lot of people would say that when they go into the ballot box, they wouldn't be voting Liberal Democrat because they expected you to be the most effective party at controlling our borders. Can you explain to them why they're wrong?
We Liberal Democrats have said for a very long time that we need to have some safe and legal routes so that people who have a right to apply to be here, who have a right to make a new life in the UK, can apply from the safety of the first country they reach, rather than having to travel through several countries to then cross the channel on a small boat in a very dangerous way and then spend months, if not years, stuck in a hotel at the taxpayer's expense. If you introduce safe and legal routes, then you can give permission to people to come to this country safely in a timed and planned way with their family. You can plan it, you can help them integrate with their community, help them teach English, but at the same time you can then tackle those criminal gangs who are smuggling people over here because there are fewer people on those boats. I think that sounds fair and firm, and I think that's what the British people want to hear.
To some people that will sound like cut back on migration by making it easier.
No, look, I think what we're saying is, as far as the asylum system is concerned, we want people who have a legitimate right to be here to apply in a safe and planned way. But those people who don't have a right to be here, we obviously have to process their claims quickly and then return them. But that's the asylum system. Our immigration system is different. There are some sectors that, for example, our health and care sector, that rely incredibly heavily on migrants, people who come here to save lives, to look after our loved ones, because at the moment it's very hard to get British people to work, particularly in the care sector, because we're not paying a high enough salary. And guess what? The only political party that spent the last general election talking about giving a higher wage to carers so that more British people can work in those jobs and we don't have to rely so much on people from abroad was the Liberal Democrats.
You're bringing us on to the area of economics now. So let me ask you this. At the next party conference, the Labour Party conference, the current Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is going to be under huge pressure because everybody knows that she's going to have to raise money from somewhere, and she's made big promises on tax, which are difficult to break. What would be the Liberal Democrat advice to the government now about how to close the clear gap between taxation, borrowing and public spending?
There are two things that we have repeatedly asked the Labour government to do. The first is to grow our economy so that we grow the size of the pie. And one very clear thing we've said is the government really should be getting a better deal with Europe. And if they did that quickly, then they could bring in, about £25 billion of money into the public purse. And it's really frustrating they've wasted the last 14 months not getting a better deal with Europe. And the second thing is that if the government wants to raise revenue, they want to raise taxes, then for goodness sake, go after the big corporates who have been raking in billions of pounds of money, ask them to pay a little bit more before you turn to struggling families and small businesses. We have given example after example, raising taxes, for example, on the big tech companies, on the big gambling companies. We've called this weekend for a windfall tax on the big banks. These are just some of the examples and the ways in which the government could be raising revenue in a fairer way without hitting struggling households.
On the European side of your answer, let me ask you, is your argument essentially that we have to accept EU rules in order for greater access to their markets and vice versa?
Our argument is twofold. First of all, if the Labour government got a better deal with Europe within the Labour Party's own red lines, which excludes a customs union, even then you could get £25 billion extra into the public purse because you would be boosting growth even within their own red lines, and they're just not getting on with it. Separately, we Liberal Democrats do want to go further. We want to create a new UK-EU customs union to rip up all the red tape that is holding back our British exporters and holding back their ability to grow our economy here in Britain.
Final point, Ed Davies has said that British politics has changed dramatically. There are now so many parties competing for power, you can't tell what's going to happen next. What are the parties that you would never do a deal with, never go into government with?
But we couldn't have been clearer today, and Ed Davies couldn't have been clearer in his speech, that we are taking the fight to Nigel Farage, we're taking the fight to Reform UK, and we see it as a moral duty to try and stop them. Beyond that, it's far too early to say what on earth is going to happen in British politics. If you had asked us 14 months ago, where we thought the country was going to be, literally nobody would have guessed that the Labour Party, which swept to power with a huge majority, would now be in such a mess. So I'm just not going to guess what's going to happen in 14 months' time, let alone another 3 years.
All right, that be true. Daisy Cooper, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC tonight.
Pleasure.
Now, another thing we've been talking about this evening, of course, is the incendiary remark by President Trump that London wants to go to Sharia law under the stewardship of Mayor Sadiq Khan, who he described as terrible. Our political editor, Natasha Clark, is here to tell us more. Natasha, we've heard from President Trump. What is Sadiq Khan saying about this?
Well, at first, a few hours ago, Team Sadiq was saying we're not even going to dignify this with a response. But they have actually responded in the last few hours. Sadiq Khan has tweeted, "Ignore the haters. London is the greatest city in the world." He basically then sort of tweeted a very long image basically listing all these reasons why London is so great. It seems to me, Andrew, though, that really just Donald Trump, obviously they've had a long war of words for a long time. But he did say that earlier today he'd had a very grumpy day. He said the UN teleprompter didn't work. He'd had a broken escalator. So
broken lift, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It seems to me that that really he's just had a bit woken up on the wrong side of the bed.
Had a bad day. It's pretty clear, I think, that Donald Trump is going to hang over the Labour Party conference as he hangs over London at the moment as well. Lots and lots of challenges for Keir Starmer coming up. We're beginning to get into the mode of asking ourselves how Starmer is going to handle the Labour conference. What are you hearing?
Yeah, Andrew, I mean, all signs that I'm hearing are that the Prime Minister does really want this big bang reset moment to come at party conference. He's had a pretty torrid month and a half, hasn't he? He's lost Angela Rayner, he's lost his US ambassador.
He's had a reset.
We're in phase 2. We might now be moving to phase 3. But Andrew, all the signs that I'm hearing from people who are preparing for a party conference is on the 2-child benefit cap, and that the Prime Minister might be preparing to lift that cap as early as next week. And I'm told that an announcement could potentially come as part of the party conference. Sources have told me that basically the Prime Minister is doing some work on this right now. We know that child poverty action strategy is coming, and the Prime Minister is looking for a big bang moment. It could be the 2-child benefit cap.
This is really, really interesting because, of course, it's quite expensive. It's not that popular in the country to lift the cap on benefits for families beyond 2 children. But if there was one moment where he'd actually get people on their feet applauding him at the Labour Party conference, and it's not easy to find many such moments, this would be it.
Absolutely. And to be fair, Andrew, he has always said that he wants to lift it when the economic conditions allow. Now, we've had reports out today saying that the Treasury could be looking at £30 billion worth of extra tax rises in the budget. Now, it's not exactly a good time for that, but this would cost £3.5 billion, and that would be something for Rachel Reeves to find extra in that. However, somebody else that did say to me today, this will be a very good sop to the left to announce this as part of his party conference speech. Obviously members, obviously MPs, lots of grumbling going on behind the scenes, but to announce this to MPs, the party faithful in Liverpool, you're right. It would be
quite a moment.
It would be quite a moment for him.
One final thought. Torsten Bell is the minister writing the budget at the moment. Now, the woman who's taken over from him, Ruth Curtice, told us earlier on of her suggestion that they might raise income tax by 2p, but cut national insurance by 2p as well, which meant that pensioners and landowners and people living on those kinds of incomes would be paying more tax, but ordinary working people would not. And that therefore, perhaps just by a shade, that might not be quite breaking the manifesto promise. Do you think they'd get away with that?
It would be tricky, wouldn't it, Andrew? But I think you're completely right. And Rachel Reeves right now is looking at every possible way of not breaking that promise. And, you know, James Murray, who you spoke to yesterday, was also asked on another station about putting VAT on taxis. This is just something that they absolutely cannot avoid talking about. They are going to be asked every single time a Treasury Minister goes on any programme from now until the budget whether they could possibly tweak these rules. We know that if there's £30 billion of taxes to raise, the Treasury is going to have to be tweaking a lot of those things. And I think they will be sticking, not exactly to that promise. We saw what happened last year with national insurance on employers. If they can keep it away from working people, I think the Treasury will be happy with that.
Well, as somebody who spends much of my life inside a black cab, I'd hope very, very, very much they don't do that. Natasha, thank you so much for that. Coming up, we're going to hear from the aunt of a British Egyptian activist who has finally been freed from prison in Cairo after 6 long years. But the time now, 6:47.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
At the UN today, Donald Trump has slagged off London less than a week after British taxpayers paid millions to fund his second state visit. What a liberty.
Ian Dale on LBC. Rover. Leading Britain's conversation, LBC, tonight with Andrew Marr.
6:49. Now, right at the top of the show, we were talking about those Russian incursions into NATO airspace. There have now also been drone sightings over Denmark and Norway. Let's talk now to Anders Vistisen, the outspoken Danish MEP who once told President Trump to F off in the European Parliament. You're never going to live that down or be forgotten for that, Anders. But thank you very much for joining me tonight. What is the mood in Copenhagen, if I can ask, about the drones that closed the airport? The airport, I think, is now open again.
Yeah, it was only closed for about 4 hours last night. So yes, it's open again. There's some delays today due to incoming aircrafts that couldn't get in last night, but the site is operational. There's no problem. But of course, most of the political chatter is about who was behind this drone. We can maybe not say attack, but who was behind these drones going up from the Copenhagen Oslo airports, and is the and is it a hostile foreign actor? And there's some credit to that claim, and then of course the fingers is pointed at Russia.
Now, two reasons that might be the case. One, I gather these were very large drones. They're not sort of the kind of drones that kids put up when they shouldn't. They're big drones. And second, Denmark has particularly annoyed Moscow recently because of some of the equipment you have been supplying to Ukraine. Both true?
Both true. The police are saying that the drones are on an industrial scale. It's not something that can be done with the toy drones. Also true is that it has shown a big weakness in the Danish capabilities to deal with this threat. We can see that we don't even know how many drones. There's talk from 2 to 4 drones. We don't know where the drones went after they had interfered with the Danish airspace. So I think many people are thinking that the Prime Minister is talking a very tough game when it comes to Russia, but have maybe not prepared the nation for this kind of hybrid warfare that we know Russia intend to apply to NATO countries, and especially a NATO country like Denmark, who has been very outspoken on Ukraine and on Russia in general.
So perhaps a wake-up moment for Denmark generally. And Norway, certainly over Oslo Airport, something similar seems to have happened.
Yeah, it seems to be at least a similar situation in Oslo. For many, many years, the Danish defense have been neglected. We have seen that we have taken the peace dividend all through the millennia and up to today, and therefore the Danish defense capabilities are clearly lacking a lot of tools in the toolbox when it comes to fighting both conventional weapons, but also these new kind of system. And if something has been shown from the Russia-Ukraine war is that drones are something we need to be taking serious when it comes to the battlefield and also when it comes to hybrid warfare, and that has become abundantly clear last night in Copenhagen.
An ominous moment, a moment of realpolitik for Denmark and for Copenhagen. Anders, thank you very much for talking to LBC. Now, the government said it will do everything in its power to deport Hadush Kebatu, the man who was found guilty of sexually assaulting a 14-year-old girl, triggering those protests outside the Bell Hotel in Epping over the summer. Our reporter Shivani Sharma has been at Chelmsford Magistrates Court today, where Kebatu was sentenced this afternoon.
Andrew, the judge couldn't be clearer with his sentencing today, telling Hadush Kebatu that he is manipulative, that he showed no shame or remorse for the offences he'd committed, and that he poses a serious threat of future sexual offences, as he handed him the maximum sentence a magistrate's judge can typically give, 12 months in prison for 5 convictions dating back to July, including touching a 14-year-old girl's thigh, attempting to kiss her, asking her to come back to the Bell Hotel with him where he was living at the time, and telling her that he wanted to have babies with her. Now, the judge stressed today that Kebatu had no regard for the 14-year-old victim's age, despite the fact that she told him how old she was and despite the fact that she was wearing school uniform, something which she says now makes her feel vulnerable and exposed. The judge revealed as well today, Andrew, that Kebatu had suggested the laws in the UK are too strict. He said that Kebatu's attempts to blame both the 14-year-old girl and the adult female victim were appalling and shows that he has a poor view of women. Now, this case has sparked anti-migrant protests in Epping and across the country, with people calling for asylum seeker hotels like the Bell Hotel to be closed. And the deputy leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice, told you a few weeks ago that Hadush Kebatu should be deported.
He should be sentenced, and then I think most people in the country, myself included, would say he should be deported back to where he came from. Whether or not that happens, I question. It'll be quite a key test, actually, for the Home Secretary and this government that says they will detain and deport. I don't think the British people want to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds holding this man.
Now, the Home Office has responded, suggesting that they will try and deport Kobatu. They've said when foreign nationals commit serious crimes, we will always do everything in our power to deport them. And from today, they've highlighted that following recommendations from the sentencing review, foreign nationals will now be deported after serving 30% of their sentence rather than the previous 50%.
And now to a story that will be familiar to many regular listeners to the show. Over the last year or so, we've spoken to multiple members of the family of the jailed British Egyptian activist Alaa Abdel Fattah. Last night, we brought you the wonderful news that Alaa has now finally been freed and reunited with his family in Cairo. Let's hear next from his aunt, the acclaimed novelist Adaf Souef. Adaf, very good to have you on the show. I think you started all of this with us a long time back. First question has to be, how is Alaa?
He is very well. He's a bit thin. He's been on repeated hunger strikes, but his spirits are very high, and he sounds and talks and everything very, very much like himself. He's ecstatic.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that. A little word about the politics of this, because I can remember talking to you and to other members of the family about how important it was to persuade Keir Starmer and David Lammy to make direct personal representations to President Sisi. And whether they were listening to you or me or the show, who knows? But they did do that. I think Keir Starmer phoned Sisi at least 3 times in this case. It does show that when you put this kind of pressure on a relatively friendly country like Egypt, it can have an effect.
Well, indeed, it has had an effect, and I really, really want to thank you, actually, and to thank your program, because
that's very kind. But
it was possibly the very first one that took this up, and it's been constant and solid with us and for us, and that's been very heartening and very encouraging. And we have a result now. Of course, nothing would have worked without the central thing that happened, which was that Leila Souef, my sister, Alaa's mother, went on a hunger strike, and it was a very serious hunger strike. And so she gave everybody the instrument with which to put pressure on the UK government and everybody.
And she is an extraordinary, indomitable woman. She came onto the show as well earlier on in the hunger strike. I have to ask, finally, how she is and how your sister is as well.
Yeah, Leila is good. She's okay. I mean, the hunger strike has taken its toll. She's still very thin, but she's regaining weight. She's still, I mean, you don't just immediately recover from months.
Of course not.
Of a hunger strike, but she is on the way back. She's actually clocked in with the university. She's signed up to teach a graduate course that's maths, and
wow.
Yes,
she doesn't waste any time. And Alaa himself, as I keep telling people, he is both Egyptian and British. Is he going to come to London shortly, and is he going to
We very
leave
much
Egypt?
hope so. He very much wants to, and this is the plan of the family, because his son is in Brighton. His son is a very good school for special needs in Brighton, and Alaa's greatest wish and feeling of duty is towards Khaled, and so we are very much hoping that he will be reunited with Khaled in the UK very, very soon.
Well, best wishes from everybody here at LBC. When the great day comes that he's back in London, we'll get some sticky cakes and some tea and have a little celebration here, I'm sure. But for now, Alaa, thank you very much indeed for talking to me. If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion. You can put your news categories in the order you want them. You can pause, you can rewind live radio, and you can listen to a range of podcasts. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
Thanks, Andrew. Donald Trump has said today that a lot of countries in Europe are going to hell. Here were his pearls of wisdom on London.
I look at London, where you have a terrible mayor. It's been so changed. Now they want to go to Sharia law.
What's your reaction to that? Here's mine.
What a limit.
He reckons we all want Sharia law in this country. Well, a few extremists might, but they exist in America too. He slags off London less than a week after British taxpayers paid millions to fund his second state visit.
What a limit.
On Cross Question at 8, Lib Dem frontbencher Munira Wilson, Telegraph political journalist Poppy Coburn,